What's up, developers? Are you a huge fan of GitHub Actions and the ways that it can help you automate some of your workflows? But one of the things that frustrates you about it is that you're always having to commit, to test, and wait for those actions to run out on the GitHub portal. What if you didn't have to do that? What if you could do it from your own machine? Well, we're going to talk about just that with a new tool right here on Cool Developer Things with Isaac. Hey folks, Isaac Levin here with another edition of Cool Developer Things, where we talk about some of the really cool things that I use daily as I go through the technology world. And some of these tools are helpful for me, some of them might be helpful for you, so I thought I would share. And if you're liking these sort of videos, be sure to comment down below that you like it, whether there's some sort of videos you'd like to see. Also, be sure to like my channel, or like the video, subscribe to my channel, and share with your friends so they can do the same. So I'm a huge fan of GitHub Actions. I think, I'm in GitHub every day with some of the projects that I'm maintaining and some of the things that I play around with. And one of the things I love about GitHub is GitHub Actions, which, if you're not familiar, is a mechanism to help you automate some workflows. Like CI/CD is a good option, or labeling pull requests, or labeling issues, things like that, right? And one of the things that's really awesome about GitHub Actions is integrating into the GitHub portal, and it's all configurable by a workflow file, a YAML file specifically, that you can embed into your own repository. So you kind of have that right next to your code, which is awesome. The problem that I've seen occasionally when I'm testing out some functionality that I want to add for an action is the process to test it. Right. So typically how you test them is you commit the YAML file locally or using something like Codespace or github.dev, and then you wait for that action to run. And if you have long-running actions, you may have multiple iterations of fine-tuning that particular workflow to get to what you want. And that can be a real big time suck and really expands your developer loop, which is not really exciting. Well, I wanted to show you a tool that I've come across and I've been using for a while to give us an experience locally to be able to run and debug our GitHub Actions locally. And, I think the best way to do this is let me just share my screen really quick and we can take a look at it. And that tool is ACT by Nectos. So it's an open source tool on GitHub that allows you to run your GitHub Actions locally. But there is one caveat. And because even though you can run this on Windows, Linux, and Mac, and we'll talk about how you get it in a second, it only allows you to run actions and workflows that use Ubuntu images, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. But how do we get access to ACT? Well, the first thing is there are a ton of different ways that you can get access to it. So let me scroll down. So installation, so you can install it Linux, Mac, Windows. I installed it using winget. So winget installed nectos.atc or ACT. One other interesting way is you can install it via the GitHub CLI. So if you use the GitHub CLI already, you can add it using the extension mechanisms that are built into the GitHub CLI, and that's a pretty cool option as well. And if you want to, you can just get the raw installer, or you can just download the releases, right? So let's actually take a look at what this experience looks like. So the maintainer of this project, they actually created kind of a sample to show you what this is, and that's a GitHub Actions demo under their CP Lee GitHub account. So let's just actually go in there and take a look. So I'm going to open up my command line. So as you can see here, I'm in the GitHub Actions demo, and let's just take a look at some of the experiences that we have with ACT. So first off, what I can do is let me just open this up in code, and I can bring this over in another window. As you can see here, we're in code, and I added a couple of additional workflows to be able to show what we can do. But if you can see, this is the first one. So basically, simple thing: npm install. It does a git checkout. It does a setup of Node.js. It does an npm install and npm test. So nothing really crazy. So if we go and we open this up, so we can do just do ACT version. Zoom in a little bit. Now I'll show you what version of ACT you have installed. So it's a command line utility, right? So let's just do ACT help. And this will show me all of the different arguments that we can use with ACT. Well, let's actually go through a few of them. So the number one thing that I always recommend folks doing when they play around with ACT for the first time is just doing ACT-L. What that's going to do is it's going to list out all of the workflows that you have in your workflows directory, in your GitHub directory, right? So as you can see here, I have 3 different workflows. So I have one called env, one called input, and one called test. So if you remember, if we take a look again at our actions so we have environments, input and main, and then in our jobs, we have one called test, which does that. So let's actually just run this test one. And how you can do that is you can just specify ACT, and then you specify J for the workflow name that you want to run, and then test. So before we do that, what if instead of us actually going through the entire process of just running it, what if we wanted to just dry run to make sure that we're having the correct YAML syntax, making sure that we're not having any issues there. So we can actually then do a dry run. So we can do the name of our workflow -n. And what that's going to do is it's going to set up a dry run. And let's actually take a look at what it actually does. So we're pulling down a Docker image. In this particular case, I've already have it cached, that image cached. So that's why it was so quick. And then we create a container that runs that version of Ubuntu ACT latest. And that is the image that it's using. And we can talk about that in a second. And then as you can see, it's doing a git clone. It tests that. It does checkout. It does setuping of npm or a node, and there's npm install and test. Well, let's just run this instead. So like specify that, and then we click this, and then it's actually going to go through the process of doing all those things. So it's going to pull down that Docker image. It's going to build a Docker container. It's going to do that git checkout. It's going to set up Node.js. It's going to do an npm install, and then it's going to run that npm test. And depending on how long your workflow is, it might take a little bit of time, right? So let's actually skip ahead to the end of this video where we can actually take a look at the output. All right, so our output is done. So let's actually scroll up to the top. So as you can see here, doing a Docker pull, creating a new Docker image, running that image, and then inside of that image, I'm doing a git clone, I'm doing some moves in Docker, so git checkout is done, and then I'm doing some things to set up Node.js. So as you can see here, it's downloading the artifacts for Node.js and then running it on your machine, then installing it inside of that container image, or inside of that container. And then it specifies that we have Node and npm installed. And so now there says success set up Node.js. So we have set up Node done. So this is like an actual workflow that you can get from the GitHub Actions Marketplace. And then it's going to run npm install. So taking a look at this, it runs an npm install, and that's the typical output that you see when you run npm install if there's any vulnerabilities or packages that are looking for funding. So it shows that it's working. Now the final thing is it does this npm test, which simulates running some test harnesses that you have inside of your project. And as you can see here, we have main input test, and we have jobs exceeded. So that's really, really cool. So now that we have an understanding of like what the typical thing is, so like setting up and running like a really simple workflow, let's actually talk a little bit about some of the enhanced features and some of the actual underlying things that make this work. So let's hop back over to our code base here, and let's go back here. So if we scroll down, and it gives us a lot of information about how this works and how you set up virtual environments, right? So basically, GitHub Actions offers virtual environments. We know about this, and then it specifies like what the micro image, the different Docker images are. And you can actually configure when you first run it. It allows you to choose which size you want. I've already run this before, obviously, but if I wanted to, for instance, change it, so like these settings are configured in an environment file. So how you get access to that is it's in your user directory. So user directory in Windows, user directory in Linux, what have you, and it's just a standard file, and the format is .actrc. And we can actually take a look at what that looks like. So let's just zoom in here. So as you can see, like I have the different things here, but like what if I wanted to delete this? So I'm going to close this out, and then I'm going to delete that file, and then I'm going to run ACT again. So let's just run ACT-J test. And then it's going to ask me, right? So I've already run this, but since I deleted that folder, it's going to ask me what size image I want to have. So I can have be large, medium, or micro. So let's just choose medium, and then it's going to go through that same experience. So we'll skip ahead to when this is done. All right, now that it's done, let's just clear this out really quick. We can clear out our window. And then let's go back to the GitHub repository that talks a little bit about Nexthost. So as you can see, we talked about the size of the images. One thing to call out too is that the runners are intentionally incomplete. So like it's not the entire exact same environment that the GitHub environment has. You can have alternate runner images, and then it shows you how to do that as well, which I think is really, really important. So it gives you a lot of flexibility as to the environment that these actions run in, right? And then and then one also great thing about ACT is that it provides additional things to let us be a bit more flexible as it pertains to like the environments that we want or the configuration that we need to run these workflows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over and I'm going to take a look at a couple of other workflows that I've created and how I would use them to go about and build some of these more complex actions, because this one is not very complex, right? So the first thing to call out is environment variables, right? So if we take a look at the environments.yaml, so one thing that most folks use, a feature of GitHub Actions, is the ability to specify environment variables. So you can have environment variables that are set either as a part of the action, you can pass environment variables into it, so on and so forth, right? And it's just a really, really seamless way to be able to, move state around inside of an action. So as you can see here, I have a fairly simple GitHub action, runs under Ubuntu latest, and it's called env. And basically all it does is it does an echo. So it basically prints out some environment variables. So an env first name and an env last name. And one thing that's really, really cool about ACT is that you have the ability to pass an environment variable into your ACT commands to actually get that. So I have this environment env file right here, and inside of this environment view, I just have my first name and my last name, right? So when I run this in ACT, what I can then do is let's just go. So I can do ACT-J, and then I'm gonna have it be environment, so EVN, and then I can specify the environment file not EVN, ENV, sorry, ENV file, and then I can specify that env.env file, right? And there's a lot of envs in there. But if I enter here, it's actually going to take that environment variable and then it's going to insert it, inject it into our action. So as you can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, so as you can see, hello Isaac Levin, right? And the reason why it says hello Isaac Levin here, if we go back to what our workflow looks like, we have Isaac Levin as our environment variables. And then if we look up in the environments YAML file, I'm just printing out environment first name, environment last name. So that's a really simple example of using environment variables. One thing that's also really, really commonly done with GitHub Actions is the ability to run them manually. So using the workflow dispatch approach. So basically being able to trigger your GitHub Actions and your workflows directly from the GitHub portal, right? And ACT allows you to do that as well. So if you go over to your input.yaml, which is another YAML file that I created to kind of showcase this, and let's give this a little bit more space here. All right, so I have a workflow dispatch that takes in 2 inputs, right? So one thing as well is that a lot of workflow dispatch, you can provide inputs to your action to iterate. Like say, for instance, what if you wanted to push a particular release from somewhere to GitHub releases or to npm or NuGet or some artifact repository, right? So you say like, oh, here's my release version, blah, blah, blah. So that's just one example. There's tons of examples of using inputs with workflow dispatch. So I have a workflow dispatch with 2 inputs, name and some value. And then if I go down here to my actual workflow, I'm just specifying the same thing earlier, just a print hello GitHub event.inputs.name and then GitHub.inputs.author, right? So how would I call this from ACT? So if I go back over here and let's just do, one thing that's cool is I can specify, like if I want to do workflow dispatch. So I just specify like that. So if I run workflow dispatch, as you can see here, it's going to kick off that particular workflow dispatch. But as you can see, there's nothing in there because I didn't pass any inputs into it. So how would I go about passing inputs into this particular thing? Our workflow using the ACT command line, or we can actually specify like a JSON file. So let's look at what both of those approaches look like. So the first approach, let's just actually run this from the command line. So if I do that same thing, the ACT workflow dispatch, but then I specify input name. So I go input, and then I go name, for instance, and then I just say Isaac. So this is going to work only for one input. So what's going to happen is that so we're going to see the hello Isaac from something, right? That's not really going to work the way I want it to. So what I could actually do is I can actually pass in a particular a JSON payload, a JavaScript file or a JSON file to actually do that. And if I go over to VS Code and I look out, I have this input.json file. So if inside this input.json file, I have name and author, right? So what then I could do, so what I would do is that I would do that same thing. So specify input, and instead of the workflow dispatch, I would specify E, which passes in the event payload, and then I would just do that input.json, and then it'll kick off that same action, but we'll actually have the hello developers from Isaac printout in there when this actually runs. So that gives you some flexibility for workflow dispatching with events that you want to pass into, specifies inputs. So as you can say, it's hello developers from Isaac, right? So that's really cool. But to this point, we've done a couple of like very, very simple GitHub actions. So let's actually take a look at a more complex one. So I'm going to hop out of this folder and I'm going to go into another folder which has a different project. And so this is a project called Blazor GitHub Pages, which basically takes a Blazor WebAssembly project in .NET 8 and it deploys it out to GitHub Pages. So let's actually take a look at what this code looks like. So I'm going to open up inside of Visual Studio Code, and let's close out of here. The code in and of itself isn't super important in this particular case because we care more about the workflow. But as you can see here, it says, hello world, welcome to your new app. And then if I go to my deploy.yaml file, there's a handful of things. So let's actually just minimize this for a second, minimize that. And inside of here, so you can see that it works on push and on pull request, and then it runs on Ubuntu. It does a checkout. It sets up the latest preview of .NET 8, which comes out every couple of months. The previews do, and then the full version of .NET 8 will come out in November of 2023. It uses the .NET CLI to do a restore, a build, a publish, and then it does some additional things to get GitHub Pages to work. So. And there's a couple of additional things here. And then the final thing is that it uses a third-party GitHub action to deploy to GitHub Pages. And this is the particular folder it is because I specify the release www root. So let's do this. So if we can actually change this, let's just make a change here. And let's just say, hello developers. So what I can do is if I go back to my console, and I can then do the same thing I did earlier. So ACT-L, and then I can just do ACT-N, which will do that dry run, just to make sure I don't have any syntax errors in my YAML, and then I do ACT. And this will take a little bit more time because it's doing more things. So it's doing a restore, it's doing a build, it's doing a publish, and then it finally does that deployment. So let's actually come back after it installs .NET 8, does the build, publish, whatever, and then does the deploy. Let's come back when that's done. All right, and now that's done, but one thing is very interesting. So let's actually, it looks like we're getting an error, but let's actually walk through the steps of what this actual action is doing. So if we scroll all the way up to the top, so as you can see, it's doing that git clone like we talked about earlier, it's doing that checkout, and then it's setting up .NET. So it's actually downloading the .NET SDK from the external place to get the .NET SDK from, and then it sets the environment variables that you can see here. So it sets the .NET locations, then does a .NET restore, does a .NET build, does a .NET publish, and then as you can see here, it specifies to a particular directory, and then it starts to do those moving around files. And then the next thing it does is it adds that Jekyll file that was in the action. And then if we scroll down is when it actually starts to do the deploy GitHub action. So this is using James Ives -GitHub -pages -deploy -action. So if we scroll down, it's just doing all the things here. And if we take a look and get an error message, so the error message, let's actually take a look at it. It says deployed with code a git error failed with exit code 128, but it failed with authentication because we have an invalid username or password. So why would we get an invalid username or password here? So let's actually take a look at that particular GitHub action. So like maybe this GitHub action has like some additional steps that we need to take advantage of. So let's actually have it here. And as you can see, if we scroll down a little bit, one of the things that it relies on is a token, or GitHub token specifically, which is really interesting. So, and that's the reason why that is because it's actually creating a new branch, a GitHub Pages branch in some cases, and pushing to that particular branch. That's how GitHub Pages works. So that's interesting because the GitHub token is just available for you if you're using GitHub Actions, but from ACT's perspective, it doesn't have that. So how do we actually get ACT to work if we have some dependencies on things like GitHub Actions or other secrets in general? So one thing that we can do is we can do a few things. So let's actually just go here. Let's clear out all this, and then let's clear that so we don't have an error anymore. And then we can do a couple of things. So the first thing that we can do is we can specify ACT, and then we can specify using the command line, we can actually then specify what we want our token to be. So in this particular case, if you wanted to just have it be just a freeform token, you can go to github.com, get a PAT, a personal access token, and then put it into here. But that's not a really good idea because then you have basically the shell history is going to have some token in there and you're going to have to carry that token around. One thing that's also really, really cool is that if you have the GitHub CLI already installed, you have a token, a secure token that's actually included with the CLI that you can use in this particular case. So we have GitHub token, and then let's just specify. So inside of here, and then we do this, and then we do in here, and then if we do gh auth token, which is the CLI command to get the GitHub auth token, and then we specify that, we run this, and then it's going to actually redo all that steps, but hopefully it will work now. So let's actually fast forward to it working. All right, now that it's done, as expected, we actually have the successful job. The job ran successfully. So that shows you that you can use a GitHub token that's provided by the GitHub CLI to sit in for the GitHub token secret in ACT. We can actually validate that this is working. Let's actually just go out to our deployment section. And then if we refresh this, you can see just now it did a deployment. So if I click on that view deployment, it should say hello developers, right? So this is another simple demo, but it shows you that you can use ACT for, varying complexities, right? As long as you have the runners that you're taking advantage of using for those workflows are Ubuntu. So, and I think that's a really, really cool thing. I hope that you learned something about some ways to do GitHub Action work without having to, consistently iterate testing against the GitHub portal. I'm glad you hung around for this entire video. Be sure to comment down below, like it, and subscribe to my channel if you like these cool developer things. So that's it for me today. Take care.